South Korea has the highest suicide rate among OECD countries. This is, of course, sadly not new. It's a tragic distinction the country has held since 2003. However, while high suicide rates in the country were driven by older adults in the past, the trend is shifting alarmingly towards younger generations. According to new reports, a KBS special reporting team analysed 10 years' worth of chronic illness data from the Health Insurance Review and Assessment Service and found that the number of patients aged 19 to 39 suffering from depression rose from 110,000 in 2014 to 360,000 in 2023, a 225% increase. And since 2020, depression has been the most prevalent chronic condition among this age group. Suicide is now the leading cause of death among South Koreans under 39 as well. Moreover, deaths by suicide among school-aged children and adolescents increased 2.3-fold between 2015 and 2023 as well. Leading causes that were cited are academic pressure. To analyse South Korea's notorious suicide rate, depression, and how perhaps the new administration, the new e-administration, should navigate this issue, we have joining us in the studio an expert in this field, Dr. Peter Jongho Na, a psychiatrist and assistant professor of psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine. Dr. Na, hello, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good to finally see you in person. So.
Yes, it's been 2 years since we last had you on the show. Last time it was, of course, via video call.
Yeah.
Because you are based in the US, but this issue is something that's dear to your heart of what's going on here in South Korea. And unfortunately, South Korea is still the OECD country with the highest suicide rate. But now this trend shifting seemingly more towards younger people. Just give a more statistics. Last year, 3,666 people under the age of 39 took their own lives, according to Statistics Korea. That's an average of 10.1 people a day. What do you make of this continuing phenomenon and this seeming shift towards younger people as well?
Yes. So, John, as you mentioned, South Korea was notorious for the high suicide rate among older adults. But now, I would say it's not actually a shift. If we look into the data a little bit more precisely, if we actually just look at the suicide rate of individuals between 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, we do see that the suicide rate among people who are aged 20 or older are still slightly decreasing, although it's still high. The trend has become a little bit lower compared to past years. And as you mentioned, the number of depression, when you ask about the depression, number of people suffering from depression amongst younger adults, I think the increase in the depression treatment or the diagnosis of depression is a mixed finding and mixed contributing factors are, first off, the stigma is kind of getting lower or alleviating amongst younger generations. So I would say it could be construed as concerning because the numbers are increasing, but it could also be a result of people having more access to mental health care, meaning that those who would usually not go to receive mental health services are now receiving it. So the absolute number in that case has increased. However, and I think that is also kind of why the suicide rate may be slightly decreasing in that age between 20 to 39, although it's still concerning, it's still high compared to other nations, and it is the leading cause of death in that age group. What is more alarming to me is, as you mentioned, the increasing suicide rate, which is actually true amongst individuals who are between 10 to 19. So, so that's really heartbreaking, and it seems that a lot of them are really suffering a lot from academic pressure. So I think there are two different trends here. Although I would say it is still a problem. The high suicide rate amongst individuals in between 20 to 39 is still a problem. The more urgent issue is the deteriorating mental health amongst teenagers and individuals who are not even teens. I mean, if anyone between 10 to 19.
That's really interesting to hear. So above the age of 20, suicide rate is slightly decreasing, but the number of people who are being diagnosed with depression, you're saying, is increasing.
Right.
And perhaps that could even be seen as a good thing, that there are more people coming forward then. It's becoming less of a stigma, but it's obviously suggests that it is still a major problem because so many people are still being diagnosed with depression and high stress levels. If we just look a bit more at the KBS special reporting team, it said depression among those aged 19 to 39 can be attributed to high stress levels stemming from highly competitive environments, job insecurity, and excessive stress that's been built up from even their adolescence.
Right.
I'm a little wary about these expressions as well. As a psychiatrist, tell us what the exact difference is between depression and the relationship between stress and depression.
Right. Obviously, there is a high correlation between stress, psychosocial stress, financial stress, other stressors, and depression, although the link is not direct. And we also have to think about the fact that not all people who die by suicide are not depressed, are depressed. So, meaning that there is a correlation there as well. It's a pretty strong correlation, actually. Some research shows that amongst people who kill themselves, 89 to 90% may have clinical depression. So there's that distinction there. But so it's really hard to tell. And one of the big challenges in interpreting Korean data is that the lack of Korean is because of the lack of data in Korea. So in order to find out why these people actually kill themselves or die by suicide, is we need psychological biopsy. So meaning that many professionals will have to interview people the survivors of suicide, so the people who are around them, and also have to take a closer look at what their behaviors before their death. However, that data is lacking, partly because of the lack of transparency from the government, and also not releasing or actually conducting that kind of psychological autopsy, because many nations who actually curb the suicide rate, for example, Finland is a good example, Japan is another example. They actually conduct a large psychological autopsy to find out what the root cause of these deaths are. So that's a huge missing piece in an effort to actually prevent suicide in South Korea.
You talk about transparency and efforts being made. Do you think that's because... why do you think South Korea is still falling behind in those areas?
I think there's a mix of things. So, for example, the lack of funding. So, in order to conduct those kind of large scales of psychological autopsy, we have to the government or the Ministry of Health will have to support them to actually do that, and that's because that's kind of where the suicide prevention efforts begin. But however, if you look at the budget spent for suicide prevention in South Korea, the amount is very small compared to other nations who have actually successfully curbed the suicide rate. So I think that's kind of the main issue. If we look at and if someone asks why aren't they then putting all these efforts or funds to actually prevent suicide, I think it's because of largely because of structural stigma, meaning that there's lots of layers of stigma, but structural stigma is when an institution or a larger organization has stigma towards certain diseases, for example, mental disorders in this case, or suicide. They don't acknowledge the problem, so they don't put in that much effort to to address that. So, for
Okay.
example, if we look into the statistics for OECD countries or developed nations, the budget spent on mental health, if we look at the health budgets of each nation, the average is about 5%. But in South Korea, it's anywhere between 1.5 to 2%, meaning that we're spending about 1/3 of what other developed nations are spending in mental health. And I think a large part of this is because of the structural stigma. It could be between, yeah.
Interesting. So you're saying societal stigma
Right.
is decreasing, and that's perhaps shown in the fact that there are
Exactly.
more people who are coming forward and trying to get diagnoses, and therefore we're seeing the numbers, people being treated with depression increasing. But structural stigma, that suggests that some experts have pointed out in the past that mental health support systems in Korea are passive, that it relies on individuals in crisis to seek help themselves rather than the other way round, rather than the systems, the government and agencies trying to find, root out these people as well. So you're saying that's lacking?
Exactly. If we compare the absolute numbers, so for example, Japan is about, the population of Japan is about maybe 2.4 times of that of South Korea. South Korea is spending about 5% of the budget Japan is spending on suicide prevention. So even considering the number difference, the population difference, it's such a small amount. And and another statistics is that if we compare the whole budget for suicide prevention in South Korea, it's about 1/10 of what Japan is spending in Tokyo alone. So. And especially considering that suicide rate has been the highest amongst OECD nations for the past 2 decades, it kind of shows how either politicians, it could be administrators, it could be civil servants that are. I wouldn't blame the individual, but as a more of a structural or a larger entity, they're lacking behind or. On spending more money in this crucially important problem.
This must be especially important for finding younger people who are at risk of depression and suicide. Does that suggest perhaps that's one of the reasons why there are younger people who are, the suicide rate is increasing among younger people compared to people in their 20s? You said the suicide rate is falling for people over 20, but it's still increasing for adolescents, which is very concerning.
Right. I mean, suicide is such a complex problem. It's a mixture of lots of social, psychological, biological, many issues come into play. So it's hard to pinpoint what is actually driving the increase in teenage suicide rate. But what I could say is that we are having a shortage in terms of having, say, counselors at school. We are falling behind in teaching our younger students about mental health in general, because so the mental health literacy is really falling behind compared to other nations. So I would say yes, in part because that could be. That could be improved with increased funds, increased government effort. But so I would say that that's partly true, but it's hard to say one cause is one issue is causing the increase. So I mean it's a vague response, but I think that's the most rational way I could describe it.
Okay, so just very briefly, a little bit further on youth suicide, when you see that. So what could be more of the causes then, if it's not just about having more counsellors? Why is Korea seeing this continued increase, do you think?
I would say that increased academic pressure, as you mentioned, is a huge driver. And it's not only so, and some people may argue, South Korea has been notorious for academic pressure for decades now. Why now? I would say, and this is a very subjective observation. I don't live in Korea. I only access the information through media outlets, but it seems that the trend is that the academic pressure is getting worse than before, so is intensifying, and at the same time, the age group of younger adults who are exposed to these academic stress is getting younger. So it's become more of a trend to start sending kids to private institutions at an early age. They're having more exams to get into these hagwons or the private academic centers. So I think a lot of that has been maybe one of the root causes of what's going on and why the younger adults are struggling more compared to, say, 10 years ago.
Well, there have been signs from the Lee administration that this is something that is important to them. Just 2 days after his inauguration, in fact, President Lee Jae-myung, during his very first cabinet meeting, asked Health Minister why South Korea's suicide rate is so high. What did you make of this from a practitioner's standpoint, and what specific mental health or suicide prevention policy would you like to see tackle from this administration?
Yes, so I thought that was a very positive sign of advancement because most nations who actually address this the suicide problem, it started from top down, and I think we had that a similar interview before, and meaning that either the prime minister, for example, Japan in 2006, the prime minister back then, who Abe Shinzo, was actually declared that suicide is not an individual's choice, it's not an individual's weakness, but it's more of a social responsibility. So he framed it that way, and then started this initiative, a government driven initiative to actually address the suicide problem, and they actually decreased it by 40% in the last 2 decades. So, which is a huge advancement, and also there are most nations who actually successfully decrease the suicide rate. It started from the higher ups, so either the president, prime minister. It had to be from a larger entity because it's such an enormous societal issue, and it's not only healthcare. It has to be amongst different departments. Say the health ministry of health, ministry of education, ministry of labor. All those had to join forces, and that's how Japan actually successfully curbed the suicide rate. So I think in that regard, it is encouraging that the president, especially at his right after he was elected, has voiced his interest, or at least acknowledged that this is a problem, because it's been so rare in the past that presidents even mentioned this. So yeah, as a person who's been active in voicing and trying to make people actually acknowledge this as a problem, it's been satisfying for me.
Right, so it's very important you're saying that presidents need to take the lead and push the whole government institution to try and help tackle this issue. Otherwise, things can fall through the cracks, I feel like you're saying. And in fact, you were speaking at the National Assembly as well this week at a suicide prevention forum. What was your message to the people attending, to lawmakers and other policymakers? So, as I mentioned, the effort of the president is obviously a key, one of the key elements, but also the lawmakers will have to be on board, and that's actually how Japan started their movement, because there has been calls to action from the people for the National Assembly to actually address this as a social problem. So. I tried to voice that how Japan has successfully curbed the suicide rate, and how we have to look into these other nations' success and try to actually make that into action, because as a person living abroad, there are many times when I'm really proud about South Korea. I've never been prouder as a South Korean living abroad. The K-pop, all the K-dramas. But at the same time, if you look into the anonymous posts of trolls or what have you, it starts from
mentioning that, your country has the highest suicide rate in developed world. Like, what are you guys doing? So I think this is something we have denied for so long, and now we have to address it. So what I tried to voice was, lawmakers, we have to really put more attention into this, and right. The people will have to back them up to actually make this happen. So we try to make it more of give kind of a more push for them. So but we'll see what happens.
Well, what do you make of the current programs that are running here in South Korea?
Yes.
The government support for counseling services. For example, there are currently counseling support programs like the 2025 Seoul Youth Mental Health Support Program, as well as the National Mental Health Wellness Support Program that provides financial support for those experiencing emotional difficulties and who hope to receive counseling. Is this sort of thing effective?
I would say it's insufficient, to say the least, because if we look into, there is a suicide prevention crisis line. So where people who are feeling suicidal, who are having thoughts of suicide, call to talk about their struggles, get advice, get support. And there has been advances that, for example, in the U.S., they made the suicide crisis line number to 988, which is like a mental health version of the 911 number for emergencies. South Korea has done the same. So they made a number 129, so just 3 digits, where people who are feeling suicidal can call for help. But if you look into what's actually going on in the call centers, is that the previous administration increased the workforce in those call centers from 100 to 120. But if you think about the number, you mentioned 10 younger adults are killing themselves a day. There are actually 40 deaths a day, and the whole population is 50 million. So if you think about the numbers, 120 people covering the 24/7 suicide rate, I get many feedback that people can't reach someone because of lack of personnel, lack of workforce. Put on hold, you're saying. Yeah, exactly. Or they never reach them at a certain time because everyone's occupied. So I would say it's at a point where I'm almost concerned about the people who are actually receiving the calls because there's so few funds to support them. So I would say there's a long road ahead in order to do I would say the law we have currently is pretty good. And I've heard from many Korean suicide prevention experts that when they actually present those laws to other countries, they're pretty impressed. But the issue is they don't have the funds to actually make those laws that are ideal happen. So, so that's why I've been voicing so hard that we need more funds, more access, in order to, and even the president mentioning is important, but at the same time there has to be material support to actually make things actually decrease suicide rate.
Yes, so a lot more that the country has to do, and as you said, clearly a very long road ahead still. The government machine will have to take the lead, as you said, but for now, there is a lot of responsibility on the individual to come forward as well, and I guess there needs to be a message to these people. What would you tell young people in South Korea at the moment, including those who are battling with mental health issues, how they should go about dealing with these issues at the moment?
Right, I get these questions a lot, and so I try to make it more so twofold. So first is for those who are actually suffering from depression, suffering from mental illness, who need help but who are not able to ask for help. I try to tell them that you're not alone. The WHO has shown that at least more than 3 million adults in the whole world suffer from depression. 2.5 million, more than 2.5 million actually suffer from anxiety. So when people are struggling with depression, they tend to think that they're alone, and they're the only one who are suffering. Everyone's happy, but it's not the case. So many people are actually struggling from depression. So I hope they could find the courage to actually ask for help. But at the same time, it's really hard for the individual who is suffering to ask for help when the society is not letting them to. So the another fold of this problem, as a society, we have to be more open to talking about these mental health struggles, and trying to alleviate the stigma associated with these mental health issues and also with mental health services. And lastly, there are people who are acquaintances, friends, families of people who are suffering from these mental illnesses or depression, anxiety, other issues. I think their role is the most important. So we have to help our loved ones to actually get the help they need. So I try to tell them that, we have to, these people, because these people are struggling, it's hard to be proactive. So the role of the people close to them becomes really important. So when someone asks me, how can we help people who are suffering from depression, I try to tell them, take them to the closest counseling center, to a psychiatrist, to a mental health professional, so you can help them. So I know that was a long answer to a short question, but that's kind of what I wanted to say. And also, can I add something to the increasing suicide rate among younger adults? It's actually it's a global trend. So if we look into other nations, every younger adults in this younger adults plus individuals who are in their adolescents, children are suffering. And I think a large issue with that, a large reason for that is actually social media. And there has been research that shows a pretty strong correlation, or it could be even predictive of mental health issues. So I think the changing and evolving environment of technology is also a huge contributor to the increasing suicide rate, mental health concerns amongst younger people.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Dr. Na, but we really appreciate you taking the time to stop by today to talk about this very pressing and important issue once again. And clearly you are someone who's very passionate about dealing with this issue for Korea as well. We've been speaking to Dr. Peter Jongho Na, Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine. Thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, John.